The day Rob Reiner died, Hollywood didn't get loud. It froze. The private service in Brentwood had no cameras, no polished, beautiful speeches, just candlelight, white flowers, and a room pulled tight like a wire. Everyone expected it to end in silence. Then Billy Crystal stepped up, took the microphone, and said one line that stole the air from the chapel. "I thought we still had time, and I let later steal the last time." And then he lowered his voice and said a name that dropped the temperature in the room. Nick. And if Rob had been afraid in silence for a long time, who saw the signs and decided to look away? To understand why one name could chill an entire room, you have to rewind to the exact moment it all began. The back door of the chapel opening, and a man who made a living with laughter walking in like his legs were carrying something heavy. The funeral was held privately in a small chapel in Brentwood. No cameras, no backdrop built for the right image, no speeches sanded down like a script, just dark wood, warm candles, and white flowers. The scent was light but stubborn, the kind that lingers just enough to remind you this is where final words live. The pews were packed close. People sat upright, facing forward, afraid that even a small sound could crack the atmosphere tightening around them. And the strange part was this: the silence wasn't luxury. It was the feeling that there was nothing left to hide. The back door opened slowly. Billy Crystal walked in. He didn't scan the room. He moved straight down the aisle like he was trying not to collapse in public. In his hands was a tight bundle of white flowers. Tucked inside was a small card, the corner creased and worn, the mark of a hand that had clenched it and released it, again and again, like he'd argued with himself too many times before deciding to bring it here. Every step looked heavy. You couldn't tell if it was age or something else dragging him back. He stopped in front of Rob's photo and stood there for a long time. Long enough for the space to feel like a fight. Step closer or turn around. Accept it or keep pretending the person is still somewhere in the room. Billy placed the flowers down, straightened the card carefully, and then walked toward the front. No notes. No setup, just a microphone on a wooden podium. He took the mic and held still for a beat. The beat of a man asking himself, should I say this? Am I allowed to say this? A man who spent his life making people laugh was now staring at the one thing laughter can't fix: grief. He lifted the mic, took a slow breath, and spoke in a low, rough voice, and like each word had to be dragged out. I hate standing here, because if I'm standing here, it means Rob is really gone. Nobody moved. Nobody cleared their throat. Nobody whispered. Because in that moment the room understood. This wasn't a proper ceremonial tribute anymore. This was something else, something you couldn't afford to miss. Billy said Rob wasn't a loud man. Rob didn't walk into a room to take it over. He just existed in a way that made other people feel safe. Then Billy dropped a small detail that stung. Rob always called right on time. Not early, not late. If you said 8 o'clock, your phone rang at 8 o'clock, like Rob was keeping a minimum order in someone else's life while everything else stayed chaotic. After every time Billy appeared in public, Rob would send a short message. No long explanations, no extra words. Just enough to let Billy know. I watched. I'm still here. But the most important habit, Billy said, was this. Before the work, before the jokes, before the small talk, Rob always asked one question. Are you okay? And it wasn't a throwaway line. Rob asked, and then he waited for the answer. If Billy went quiet, Rob stayed quiet too. If Billy said, "I'm not okay," Rob didn't preach. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't force strength. He just stayed. Sat beside him. Listened. Let Billy breathe back into his own rhythm. And you think that would be the warmest part of the service? The part where you remember a good man and wrap it in something gentle. But Billy suddenly lowered his voice like he was stepping down into a deeper place. He said he still had Rob's last message. It was short. Rob sent it, and Billy thought, "I'll answer later." He'd even promised Rob a meal. Nothing dramatic, just two friends sitting down. And Billy told himself, later. Billy stared into the empty space in front of him like Rob was standing there listening. His voice thinned, almost breaking. "I thought we still had time. I let later steal the last time." The room didn't know what to do except stay silent. This kind of pain doesn't need loud crying. It just sits in the middle of the space like a weight, and everyone feels their chest sink with it. Then Billy said there was something Rob had once asked him not to share. But today, Billy had to say it. Not to judge, but to help people understand what Rob's final years had been like, at least through what Billy had heard and witnessed. He paused, and that pause was colder than the last one, because you could feel the story about to change its voice. Billy looked up and spoke slower. Rob had called him late at night, not about movies, not about work, but about being a father, and what it feels like to watch your child slip out of reach. And then Billy said a name, and the chapel's temperature seemed to drop. Nick. 2 syllables, and the air changed. Billy didn't rush. He let the silence run for another beat, like he was admitting this was the part he'd tried to avoid, and couldn't. Billy said Rob was never the kind of man to turn family into a story. He hated being a burden. He hated making other people carry his weight. If he could hold it, he would stay quiet. But some nights, very late, Rob still called. Sometimes the other end was just breathing, and a long gap like Rob was asking himself, "Should I say this? If I say it out loud, does it turn into an accusation against my own son?" And then Rob would ask questions that had nothing to do with Hollywood. What does a father do when he feels his child slipping farther and farther away? Billy said those weren't philosophical questions. They were distress signals wrapped in careful language, so the man speaking could still keep his dignity. Rob wasn't asking how to control. He was asking how to stay close. Not by force, by presence. And that's the cruel part. Some fears are so big you can only circle them. According to Billy, Rob talked about Nick without anger, without blame. Just a long, quiet fear. Nick had been fighting addiction for a long time. So long the family stopped counting in years and started counting in almosts. Almost stable, almost past it, almost real this time. Then the slide again, then the climb. Billy didn't give numbers. He didn't feed the room anything sensational. He said one thing that landed heavy. The worst part wasn't relapse. The worst part was the helplessness of a father. Someone who can't suffer in his child's place. Can't take the hits for them. Can't lock the cravings inside his own body so his child can breathe. That helplessness was what wore Rob down. And Rob kept coming back to the same question, like a metal ring tightening. What did I miss? Where did I fall short? He didn't scream it. He said it like a man walking through a dark hallway, afraid that touching the wrong wall would make everything collapse. Billy said Rob was terrified that every choice could push Nick farther away. Talk too much, and your child feels cornered. Stay quiet too long, and your child feels abandoned. Step closer, and they explode. Step back, and they fall deeper. Rob lived in the middle, like someone balancing on a wire stretched over a drop. There were days when Nick seemed okay, clear-eyed, coherent, bright enough for Rob to believe, this will be okay. And then there were other days when Rob looked at his son and couldn't be sure who was driving, Nick or the addiction. And the scariest part was not knowing whether to move toward him or move away, just to avoid lighting a match near something that could blow. You love someone, and that love makes you afraid of your own footsteps. Billy said Rob was exhausted from waiting in anxiety, the kind of waiting that kills you the slowest. Then Billy moved into a topic no one wants at a funeral, but everyone has to face: money, wills, assets, inheritance. Rob wasn't talking about greed, and it wasn't simply distrust. If anything, it was love turning into fear. According to Billy, Rob was terrified that if everything landed in Nick's hands too soon, at the wrong moment, when Nick wasn't steady, it wouldn't help him stand up. It might push him down faster. Money wasn't a reward. It could be fuel on a fire, and the difference between help and harm was timing. Rob had nights where he couldn't sleep because of one question: how do I leave things the right way? Not what's right on paper. What's right for a son fighting something that could swallow him whole. And the line that made people go cold was what Billy said Rob once murmured, barely above a whisper: I love him, but I'm afraid what I leave behind could make him fall faster. Billy swallowed hard. He said later, after everything happened, he couldn't stop asking himself whether pressure, expectations, money, and addiction could have pushed Nick into a moment of losing control, a moment you can't rewind. The air in the chapel felt heavy as lead. Then Billy spoke about Rob's deepest fear, not a prophecy, not a warning, just a thought that flashed and got pulled back immediately. Rob feared there were moments when Nick wasn't Nick anymore, when addiction had the wheel, when reason wasn't there, and actions could go farther than anything a father could stop in time. Rob even feared that one day, he himself could be in danger, not because his son hated him, but because in that moment, his son might not recognize who was standing in front of him. And Rob stopped there. He didn't let himself say more, like one more word would turn into a charge against his own child. So Rob stayed, kept calling, kept waiting, kept hoping in the way fathers do. As long as I'm still here, he won't be completely alone. And then Billy pulled the room back to the present, the photo of Rob framed by white flowers, and he said a line that hit like a nail into wood. Rob once told me, I can direct everything on a film set, but I can't direct my son's life. Listen to that. This wasn't a story about a director anymore. It was a story about a father trapped between love and fear, between staying and helplessness. And you could feel Billy buckle under the weight of it. Then he said, if you want to understand why I can't stand up here without breaking, you have to go back to where it started. Because to me, Rob wasn't just a legend. He watched my whole life. That line wasn't said for style. It was a lifeline. Because if Billy stayed too long in the Nick part, if he let the room drown in a father's fear, this wouldn't feel like a goodbye anymore. It would feel like a verdict hanging in the air. And Billy didn't want Rob remembered as a tragedy. He wanted Rob remembered as a human being. Rob and Billy met before either of them became a monument. No spotlight, no crowd. Just two men with the same rhythm. Comedy that doesn't have to shout. Comedy that isn't cheap. Comedy built on observing people. Rob didn't see Billy as just a funny guy. He saw someone who could say what other people think, but can't put into words. And Billy didn't see Rob as just a director. He saw someone who could turn small, ordinary life into cinema without stripping away its kindness. Friendships like that show up in the way they'll argue over a single word, a pause, a silence. Not to win, but to make the story feel true. And the clearest proof was when Harry met Sally. Rob stood behind the camera, holding the rhythm of a story that looked simple. Billy stood in front of it, carrying that rhythm into the world with his eyes, his voice, and those very human silences. The movie didn't need a giant twist. It lived in dialogue that sounded like real life, but hit what people hide. Loneliness, fear of aging, fear of choosing wrong, fear that no one will stay. To the audience, it was a romantic comedy. To Rob and Billy, it was a kind of understanding. One man shaping the beat, the other man delivering it. Time moved on, and they weren't side by side every day. Rob directed, produced, chased the stories he believed needed to be told. Billy kept acting, hosting, doing what he does. But the thread between them didn't snap. It just changed shape. They didn't need daily check-ins or polite calls. They needed one call, one sentence, "I need to talk," and the other one would pick up. Billy said Rob had a strange gift, showing up at the exact right moment. Not to hand you solutions, not to fix your life, just to be there. Ask one clean question. And if you couldn't speak yet, Rob would sit with you in silence. Like silence could be a kind of embrace. That's why, when Rob became afraid of what was happening with his son, he chose Billy. Not because Billy had medical answers, not because Billy had lawyers, not because Billy had media connections, but because Billy wouldn't turn that fear into a story. Billy would keep it where it belonged, as something painfully human. And that's why, in that chapel, Billy wasn't reading. He was unloading. He was saying out loud what he never thought he'd say in front of a room full of people. Because if he didn't, it would stay lodged in his throat like a stone, reminding him every day that he once chose later. And then he returned to the sentence you can't forget, the one he delivered like a clean cut. "I thought we still had time, and I let later steal the last time." That line isn't just Billy's grief. It's a slap at a habit all of us have. The belief that apologies, check-ins, hugs can always wait. If Rob left anything behind, Billy said, it wasn't only movies. It was a way of living, telling stories without noise, loving without performance, staying present with kindness. And right here, I'm asking you to do one small thing. If Rob Reiner ever gave you a memory, a scene that warmed you, a line that made you feel understood, leave a heart in the comments as a quiet goodbye. And if you've got a later sitting between you and someone you care about, drop this below. What would you say today if it were the last time? Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because here at Viral Watch, we don't just tell you about celebrities. We tell you about the moments that make an entire system go silent, and the truths people only dare to say after the lights go out. And here's the final question hanging in the air before you leave. If Rob was afraid in silence for a long time, how many signs showed up right in front of the people around him and still got covered up with silence?